Welcome to Writer Syndrome podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode, we're getting into influences. I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me over through pixelated imagery is Tim Ledney. Actually, you look beautiful. It's like 1080p, probably.
Thanks, man.
No problem.
1080p.
1080p. That's right. How are you? And do you want a curveball question?
That's one right there.
Ah.
You answered your question with a question. Yeah, throw it at me. Let's see what we got.
So our episode's about influences. Are you under the influence of anything right now?
Caffeine?
Yeah.
Caffeine. Actually, I might have another cuppa.
Right answer.
How about you? Anything?
Yeah, a little whiskey, you know.
You're all boozed up at 10 in the morning?
Let's go. Let's talk about writing. That is how you write a book.
Let's do this.
Oh, my goodness. So caffeine, that's good. No, I've got water, just so everyone knows.
H2O. Not bad.
Yeah, trying to hydrate. So influences, where do we begin with this? And how deep do you want to go with influences?
It's a tough one.
I mean, I can set you a softball one. Let's start here.
Okay.
And I think there's two ways we can break this out. We can break this out into you as generally as a person in your writing who you're influenced by and have been, or what would influence your last manuscript in your current book. So you want to start there with like the more specific, what influence critical mass and or maybe your next project?
It's weird because when I think about critical mass, obviously the book has so many influences, not only in horror literature, but like 1980s and 90s horror movies.
Yeah.
So almost to a fault. And it's not like I intentionally referenced anything because I didn't want to have this kind of insider winking at the reader all the time, but it's me. And I personally have internalized so many forms of media over the years that they tend to come out. And sometimes it wasn't even until after I'd gone through multiple drafts that I was picking up things that influenced me. So it wasn't always intentional. Like I ended up buying a Blu-ray re-release of the 1980s remake of The Blob.
Blu-ray.
Right? I know.
Physical media guy.
I know. It was on sale. Anyway, so I watched the original Blob, and obviously I had that in the back of my head because, I have some crossover with like creature feature type movies. So I was watching some creature features and I was like, oh man, I remember being a little kid and just loving that remake of The Blob. I'll buy that, I'll watch it with Jill. And I had already finished the book and I finished the movie and I was like, oh my God, my book is just this movie. I mean, it's different, but there are so many aspects, especially when you're dealing with like a 3-act structure, 15 story beats. Like a lot of my story beats were lining up in some way with that movie. Yeah. And it wasn't intentional. It just kind of came out like somewhere in my lizard brain when I was a kid that movie stuck with me. And for some reason it came out. So I think that's okay if we're going to like pull it back about like, you can't really escape your influences, I think.
No.
I don't think you should mimic them necessarily. You shouldn't remake them. But I think I was thinking about this before the cast. I think my goal is not to outrun my influences, but to make sure that I have my own voice while writing. So I certainly am in the shadow of like monster movies and creature features and Stephen King and Clive Barker. For that one, it really was just like 1980s and 90s media that I consumed as a kid. Because like the kernel of that story came to me when I was like at the gym and I was like listening to the Dead Boys. And maybe it's less of an influence, maybe it's more of an inspiration. Yeah. But there was one Dead Boy song in particular that just kind of conjured this scene in my head in that moment. Yeah. And it was like the 70s and it was winter and it was like punks and they're cold and there was like a monster in the sewer. And I was just like, my mind just kind of went off on this like little vision quest. Yeah. And that was like the kernel of like that one little vignette of a scene from that one song called Not Anymore kind of birthed the whole story for me. Yeah. Which I thought was pretty interesting.
That ties into like another question I'm going to ask later though. But
how about you? Because you got to answer that yourself, right? Like what are your influences?
I don't have to answer anything, Tim. This isn't the KGB. I don't have to answer anything.
I got to turn it back. What were your influences for host?
Mine were originally this was going to be like a screenplay I was going to write. So, and I think you and I are both very, very influenced by movies.
That's how mine started too.
Yeah. I think it's just like movies are kind of like our core, it feels like. I also was a very slow reader and didn't read a lot when I was younger, so I'm kind of catching up to that. So I wouldn't say I have a lot of specific, I mean, I have authors that I'm influenced by now, but it's, more recent. But for hosts, I can tie it directly to like 3-4 very specific things. Because when I started writing, I started just writing down things that I wanted it to feel like. But yeah, definitely like movies again, like 3 Days of the Condor, the Sidney Pollack movie with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. Like, I love that movie, and I love those like 70s, 80s like spy thrillers. And that one's, Robert Redford's like a bookish like CIA researcher, and he comes back and his whole crew is dead, and he's now on the run, and I love that stuff. And that was like kind of the vibe I wanted with Host. Sneakers, like one of my all-time favorite movies. It's another Robert Redford one. Ben Kingsley's in it. Dan Aykroyd, River Phoenix, and it's just like that one I looked at more. And that's another one. It's like a hacker who is hired to figure out what's on this black box, MacGuffin type of device, and then they're on the run. But there's this vibe I love about it. It's just fun. Like there's like this sense of just like enjoyment and fun of going through the story, which I really wanted to capture, but also like this techno thriller aspect too, which was like, this is perfect. And I wanted that vibe of like friends on a mission type thing. It's kind of like you like 80s, kids on bikes type thing. Mine was like,
mine's very much kids on bikes.
Everyone's got their own kind of personality, and Sneakers does that so well. And it's just as fun. And I would say war games, Matthew Broderick one, again, hacker focused, kicks off something that's globally impactful. That is such at the heart of Host. And then for like book wise influences, I think at the time I had read Ready Player One just as I was writing this, and
you're like, I can do this.
Yeah. Which is like, it's not the same genre at all. I mean, it's science fiction. Mine's a little more thriller, but there's sci-fi in there. But that was more for just the brevity and the lightness of the writing and like the pacing.
Yeah, just fun, man. Yeah, like it moves at a clip. It's just a fun book to read.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to capture. Like, it's fiction at the end of the day. And I sometimes like, I've talked about like, I read like a lot of techno thrillers and thrillers of Tom Clancy stuff. And some of that stuff is like, hey, people love that. And I do. But I didn't that's not the book I wanted to write. And I want it to be fun. And I want it to have like this just kind of excitement adventure type thing with technology happening to be there with, as like the backside. But yeah, those are kind of like the main influences for Host specifically. And it's funny, while I was going through revisions, I went back through like the books I was reading during revisions and was like, I was reading Cormac McCarthy. I was reading The Expanse, which I enjoyed those books because again, they got a good pacing to them. And a lot of Daniel Suarez, who's like a techno thriller guy. He's written like 3 or 4 books that I really enjoyed, and they're like more sci-fi techno thriller stuff. So I can see myself plucking some of that stuff in like during revisions. But
it's funny, man, like thinking about literary influences, because I have this dichotomy of self when it comes to me as a writer, where I even way back into my 20s, I kind of wanted it to be high concept, low brow. And I always liked the idea of there being, like, I like the idea of mixing genre fiction with literary fiction, and always have. And I think it's because coming from like my history before, and like academia is probably too strong a word, but like my schooling and what I read and like what stuck with me, whether it's like Joseph Conrad or like Don DeLillo or Thomas Pynchon, these are books that are just as influential to me as a person as like that 1980s Blob movie was. And you'll see it, like as you were going through my beta, you're like, what is this incomplete sentence just hanging out here? And I was like, I don't know. I'm just doing this thing where I'm like ending things like one-word sentences or incomplete sentences just for punchy. And now as I'm going back, looking at like my book again before I submit it to a contest coming up, I'm putting them back in. But very intentionally, because I took them all out because I was like, oh, I don't know what these are. And now as I've gone back and read a little more of, literary fiction, it's like, oh, I think I lifted that directly from Cormac McCarthy. I lifted it directly from Don DeLillo. Even in The Exorcist, like I think Blatty has some literary auspicions, and they're in there as well. And I was like, okay, like I had them, they came out, I edited them out because I felt nervous and insecure about having them. Now I'm like, oh wait, those are just my influences coming out, and it's adding to my own voice. So I'm kind of leaning back into it a little bit, but certainly intentionally. So I had this huge debate about really like how visible should this like syntax this like syntactical literary influence be?
Yeah, because there's a line between, which was gonna be one of my questions too, is like there's this line of like influence versus copying, right?
Totally.
Where do you cross that line, or where don't you? You know, it's like if all of a sudden you don't have any punctuation in your writing at all, you're like, all right, Carmen McCarthy does, you know, do something different, you know, or do something that's normal, you know, like, you know, that's expected. But
you know, it's interesting because like obviously King's an influence of mine just because he's just such a great writer. And talking about like Ernest Cline, King can write a 600-page book that just kind of moves at a clip, you know?
Yeah.
It's like eating popcorn or something. For that reason, like to answer your question, I was going to reread Pet Sematary because I think it's a potential comp for my upcoming book.
Yeah.
But I was like a little scared to do it because I know that I'm going to digest it and accidentally, I think if it's too recent and too in genre, there's a chance that I mistake an idea, you know, a sentence, a situation, a motivation for my own when it could very well be something that King had done. So I was like, you know what? I'll read it after again. Like, because I do want to go back and reread it. Because I was really trying hard to find scary novels. Like and they're hard to find. Yeah. There's not many. Like obviously there's a ton of horror books, but not many actually instill terror or fear.
Yeah.
Pet Sematary is one that I found frightening. Same thing with House of Leaves and The Exorcist. Other than that, it's kind of, and maybe like The Haunting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm trying to be very, very cognizant of, you know, not plagiarizing, you know, but also wanting to hit those genre expectations and, you know, kind of deconstruct why those books work and how do I make my book work in a scary way.
So I kind of see, like, think about this in the little shower thoughts, and like writing is kind of got these three buckets of like, you got your style and structure, maybe you got plots, and then you've got kind of like your vibe and feel of the story. Mm-hmm. Of my influences, which ones kind of fit into which buckets? You know what I mean? Like, do you have any like, oh, I mean, you kind of touched on it already, like you, DeLillo, and maybe in Cormac McCarthy, kind of how you're writing a particular sentence or like maybe paragraph flow or word choice. Maybe you pulled that influence from them. The plots, like we're getting a lot of that from like movies we watch. Obviously, like movies I watch, you watch The Blob, stuff like that. And like vibe and feel. Do you have any like specific kind of ones that drop in each of those buckets? I mean, you kind of covered two of them already, but like maybe vibe and feel. Is there like an author or movie or whatever that kind of fits like how you wanted it to? Yeah, that influences you that overall? Like maybe not just for, you know, Critical Mass, but in general.
Yeah, I mean, Critical Mass was definitely like a love letter to 80s horror. So the vibe and feel, I wanted it to have the lightness of something like Evil Dead 2.
Yeah.
And maybe even The Blob, but also having that serious kind of problem to solve that things like It have. Yeah. Where it is like kids on bikes and they all have their own, you know, unique backstories and motivations, and which leads to really nice character interactions. I would say that even though I finished my first draft before reading it, I think The Troop by Nick Cutter was a really great example. And it's something that vibe-wise, although the whole thing, all of The Troop is like horrifying and disgusting, and there's very little levity. But when it comes to the serious moments of Critical Mass, like the horror moments, well, I don't know. I can't even say that I ever went that hard. It's I don't know. You read it. For me, The Critical Mass feels like a light book. It feels like the characters are in danger. They're not all going to make it, but mostly it's a romp.
I haven't read a lot of horror. I mean, I guess I've only read a couple of Stephen King books, and that's probably about it. So, I think I've got a benchmark in terms of movies that I think are scary and where that fits. But yeah, I agree. It feels more like a lighter romp and kind of like an adventure, kids on bikes type vibe, which makes sense based on what.
How about you? What were you going? I mean, I guess once again, you kind of sort of answered this when it came with vibe. Like you were kind of going for that sneakers.
Yeah, War Games, 3 Days of Condor, kind of all mash those together. I think looking at my bookshelf and books I've read that I really enjoy, and this is going to sound so generic, but like Isaac Asimov, I think in terms of just short, quick, fun, plotting, tight stories that are just great, and you can read them in 300 pages, and it's like, well, that was fun because you just wrote so much, and they cook, and they're just fun, good stories. I'm late to the game with Stephen King. I've only read 3 of his novels, I think, and I read his book on writing, and I think I look towards him, even like Ernest Cline's The Ready Player One, like that simplicity of writing, that style, where it's just this, it's tight.
Brevity, not using words you don't need, not using words the reader won't know, because a lot of authors do that very intentionally, and it has its place.
Absolutely.
I don't try to do it. I accidentally have done that. But yeah, that's not, I don't really want to confuse the reader, and nor do I want them to open their phone and Google something, because then they're not reading.
Yeah, I'm reading, so I'm right now, and I enjoy his books. I'm reading a book by Neil Stephenson, which we'll get to the reading watching thing. And I enjoy his books, but like right now, I've hit a couple words. I'm like, I don't know what this word is. I don't want to look it up. I'm just going to sure, whatever, and move on.
Yeah.
But you're kind of expecting that from him and his type of writing style. It's a style that like I enjoy reading, but I don't think I want to write like that.
Yeah.
Because that's not me. That's not a style I'd want.
I mean, you called me out on it. You're like, within the first few pages of my book, you're like, yep, this is Tim. He's already using words I don't know. And that's horrifying to me, because I don't want to, as much as like when I'm writing, I obviously want to add layers of meaning. And I'm always like striving to have a surface level story and, the themes and the internal story. So it works on multiple levels, so that when the book is over, people can continue to think about it. And the story kind of continues in that way. I don't want to be overly complex on that surface level where people just aren't understanding the words I'm using.
Yeah.
It's like the absolute meat and potatoes. But I mean, thinking about influences, I love it when I consume a piece of media, whether it be a book or a movie, and I continue to think about it, like where it works on that like metaphor level, like where it works on that, what's the subtext of it? Is the author trying to say something? Yep. And obviously not all books have to have that dual meaning. But I want mine to, because it's fun for me. Like the story continues, the relationship continues long after. And then you can start Googling, and, maybe I love that from when I was an English major all those years ago, that like just sitting down and thinking about a book.
Yeah.
And if it hits right, I think you can build such a nice relationship with the reader and kind of have them look at things in a different way, look at your text in a different way, maybe even look at their own lives in a different way. And that's so inspiring to me.
You had mentioned for Critical Mass, one of the influences was actually a song. And I wanted to get into maybe diving into both of ours, like influences outside of like writers and authors and in movies, maybe like other things.
So away from like literary media, but into like what inspires you to write. Can I tell you, answer real quickly?
Any medium,
you got me back into it.
Oh, yes.
Russ Capasso, an influence, because you started walking through this cornfield first.
Yeah.
I tried, 15 years ago. I really thought my relationship with writing was something in the rear view, that I like. Yeah. I was already creating this like fake story about myself that was me in my teens and 20s, and I've grown out of it.
Yeah.
And now I'm,
adult,
a suburban dad.
Yeah, I'm an adult. I have a dog.
But yeah, so you very much influenced me to, start working again. So thank you.
Good. Thanks. No.
How about you? What inspired you? Like, you kind of always had it in your head that you were going to write something, whether it be a screenplay or a book.
Yeah. I mean, you and I had been in writers groups for a long time trying to do screenplays and short stories and stuff like that. I think it was always just kind of hankering in the background of something I wanted to do. What influenced me? Getting laid off from my job, maybe? Does that count? Give me the little push to go do it. I think I don't know if I'm going to get really sappy about it. Probably my dad, because he worked with me a lot for this book, and he was, we were jotting ideas back for a screenplay, and then I was like, I think I'm just going to turn this into a novel because I can control all that. And so I think that he had like a lot of push and influence. Dad, I know you're listening. Love you. Thanks. And I think
that's a good point.
And I'd say outside of writers and whatnot, I'd probably say this is going to sound really weird, like comedy, because I love stand-up comedy, and like that's something I think that's influenced the tone and vibe I want
interesting
in my stories,
like a playfulness, but also like that kind of relationship with an audience.
Yeah, and I think this is also going to sound sappy, but like friends and family, because there's a lot of fun there, and it's like you can glean so much and be influenced by, I think, the people that you're surrounded by that can influence maybe your voice. Which I think that comes from there. And my mom gave me a great idea when she read it. She was like, you have these two friends, and I've said this before. She's like, have them have the dialogue that you have with your friends, because that's fun. And I was like, oh, good point. And it'll make it feel more genuine. I put that in there. So it's like, I think for voice, it comes from that. Yeah, and just like kind of having fun. We're telling stories. We're not, solving cancer or anything. So, well, maybe we will. Who knows?
Maybe we'll inspire people.
Maybe we'll inspire someone to go solve that problem. But,
Yeah, it's interesting to think back to like parents, because Well, I think for any kind of artist or performer, I think we're introduced to art in kind of like a homogenized way through schooling.
Yeah.
And I remember, being in middle school and writing one of my first short stories. And I was super proud of it, although I think I cribbed the story, or like had read something that at the time it influenced me. But anyway, I'd written a story about a girl who, really wanted perfume for her birthday. Her parents get it for her. Then she goes on a school trip to the zoo, and because of the perfume, she gets eaten by wolves. Um, and actually, about 6 months ago, my aunt was going through her old stuff, and she sent me a picture of that story because I remember she like responded to it and thought it was kind of clever and cute, and just that attention that I had gotten from my parents and the teacher and my aunt. I think, once you begin to get that light shining on you as a kid, you go to it in a way. So, I think from that moment, I was like, oh, I could write.
Yeah.
But then, pulling it back even further, I remember writing in elementary school fan fiction for Friday the 13th. Pretty much, my first book was called The Final Chapter. It was a complete ripoff of Friday the 13th Part 4 or Gleaming the Cube. I was even writing back then about like kids hanging out and doing stuff. So I honestly like, it's probably just inherently part of humans to like write.
Yeah.
But I can peel it back to like the support and attention that I'd gotten from my parents for emulating media and family. And then it turned into like short form poetry gobbledygook and the college years.
It's funny, how have you thought, stepping back, way back, time machine, have your influences changed over time?
Oh, like, so much, man.
And I think about the stuff that I was consuming as a kid. Obviously, a lot of video games, Nintendo days, and like but like movies, I was just watching movies all the time, and it was like I had Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark like on loop every single day, just watching those. Yeah. But those don't. I mean, I guess maybe I'm influenced by the fun adventure side of those things, but like. None of that
the structure could be there,
Yeah, I
mean,
your
Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces stuff.
100%. But none of that shows up in like the book that I wrote, But I mean,
right.
maybe
no
a little
lightsabers.
Bit. Yeah, there's no laser swords. I don't think. Can we say lightsabers? We might get.
So it's like, so it's part of you, but when it comes to the actual content of, host in your upcoming book, the content's not there. Like the details.
But it's still that adventure side of things. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark is just. That's a fun adventure. It's Star Wars, fun adventure. And I think that's the stuff that like still stuck in my brain. But that's, like you said, that's just kind of base.
And I'll tell you, dude, I know that amongst, especially like literary authors, there's kind of they kind of look down upon the film novel. I think they see them as like very, very different mediums. And I know. But I will say a lot of great books were influenced by movies. Even The Exorcist, which I'm just, finishing up now.
Yeah.
Blatty had the idea when he was like going through college in Georgetown, but he kind of gave up on it. It wasn't until he saw Rosemary's Baby, a Roman Polanski, that he was like, oh, I could do this, but better,
Yeah.
Like he didn't go out and read, some Victorian era book. He saw Roman Polanski's movie and was like, I'm going to write a book now.
Then that's how you get that.
Yeah.
I just am influenced by your kind of almost your peers or people in the same kind of grouping too. But
I mean, I think that's an important part to hang on because you can be influenced things that you don't necessarily idolize or worship. You can be influenced by things that maybe you think you can do it better.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to read as much as you can, especially leading up to writing. Even if it's not a great book, there could be things that you learn from books you're not really digging. Like I think there's that kind of opposite side of influences where you think that you can try your hand at it and maybe do it. If not better, you can take your own spin on it. I had that. Yeah. That got me like, Jill was like, she bought me a book and I won't name it because I don't want to disparage any authors, but she bought me a book, a few years ago. And when I finished it, I threw it across the room. I was like, oh my God. And I always bring it up because I was like, oh my God, I can do this. I can absolutely do this. Or at least I can do that.
Yeah,
and she was like, that's the best present I ever got you. It would have been the worst book to get you, but it got you so inspired to write. Yeah. So between you and me throwing that book across the room, I'm like back in it.
Couldn't wait to put it down. On my side too, like I've read a lot of techno thrillers, the Tom Clancy's and stuff like that. And kind of like the reverse. They influence me in a way of like, here are things I enjoy these, but it's not the book that I want to write. And Like I want to have like that technical aspect, but I want to have, at the end of the day, just want to have a fun story. Yeah, right. A line of like people getting a little too, Googling stuff and fact checking it, but because fiction, but
So I'm curious about genre, Russ. I mean, is it the same answer? Like, because you and I read novels across genres, nonstop.
Yeah.
But you very much landed in one, and I very much landed in one.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason, do you think? Like, is it something you shared with your pop? Is a certain piece of media in your past that like, or you just think that that's the most fun and that's where your voice fits?
I think it's the most fun and where my voice fits. I think I'm like thinking back to like, again, the influences of like the movies and stuff I was exposed to as a kid, like a lot of action movies and adventure movies. I didn't watch a lot of horror movies. And I was just square in that sci-fi, thriller stuff and the spy stuff and espionage stuff. I just love that. I think that comes back to like watching old movies, with family and just watching sci-fi stuff. And that's probably what led me towards it and like kind of influenced me to be more into technology and, I'm definitely heavily influenced by technology. That's what I follow all the time, watching new ransomware hackers and stuff like that. And I use that as a kind of influence for what I'm going to write or maybe a plot or something. So it's probably where that extends from.
Yeah, I think mine is definitely like, it's back to that relationship thing, thinking back to when I was like a little kid in elementary school and I was watching horror movies with my situ, my grandmother on my mom's side. And I would just like sit there like at the foot of her chair and she'd put on an movie, she called it, because the monster goes because there was always like Saturday Nightmares and whatever was on syndication at the time. And she would like we would just sit there together and watch them. And I think there's like I felt a bond with her at that time. And then there was a kid in elementary school that we would go out as the kids were like playing football, in third grade. We'd go pretend to be Freddie and Jason. Like that was kind of our like this imaginary world.
Yeah.
I think it was an empowering world at the time. It was kind of like a fantasy world where like it made us feel bigger and more important than we were. But those two relationships were super formative and super influential to me. Obviously, I think I've outgrown that like, need to be edgy or the escapism aspect. But I think those relationships that I had in my past totally influenced me and kind of the genre that I'm landing in.
That's really funny because like I'm thinking like, well, you see, you were in Western Master and I was down in Connecticut. So we're about a 2.5 hour drive. So 2.5 hours away with my grandmother, I was watching like Murder, She Wrote with her.
Oh,
Star Trek Next Generation, the sci-fi. And because she loved Picard, everyone does. And like this PBS series called Mystery Theater or something. So like now looking back, way back, like, where I was watching like these thriller mysteries and then sci-fi. It's like, okay, I wonder if that stuck.
It's so nice.
Getting sappy here on Writer Syndrome.
Getting sappy, oh my God. It's a very special episode of Writer Syndrome.
Getting fogged
He's
up here.
crying, everybody.
I'm crying already.
I miss you, Graham.
Yeah, I miss you, Graham. So I don't know. I think that's...
I'm going to give you one more thank you for influencing me to get back into writing.
Absolutely. Thanks for pushing me too. So I think
I'm here on the support. I'm on the support side of things.
It's the team effort to, push each other. So I don't know. So what have you been reading, watching, playing?
So reading, I'm just finishing up. Well, one, I finished up Amityville on my runs. Jeez Louise, what a piece of garbage. I feel okay saying that, right? Because I would never say that about a fiction author, but I feel okay saying that the Amityville Horror is just a piece of garbage. Oh, fuck. Anyway, I finished that up, but once again, it had its influences. I was, I'm running. When I run sometimes and something strikes me, I'll like stop and take notes on my phone.
Yeah.
And then I'm just at the end of The Exorcist by Blatty, which is so good and so surprisingly good. And, I can't tell 100% if the movie itself is burned into my brain, right? So it's really hard to disassociate the fiction from the visuals of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But my heart of heart, I feel like the book alone would have been very scary without having, the movie is kind of a backdrop.
No.
And this is one of the few times where Act 1 transition to Act 2, it's so good. And in the fun and games section, like in the middle of the book, it drops out. It turns into like a really bad noir detective story in a way.
Okay.
Except the detective just doesn't want to believe there was a murder. It's like the priest is being like, this can't be a possession. And he just, does his sleuthing And now we're building up into, transition to Act 3, where we're going to have, the final confrontation between the demon and the priests.
Right.
And it feels like Act 3 is actually going to be strong.
Yeah.
Whereas most of Act 2 was pretty boring. And they really relegate the lead character of Chris to, well, I guess she's not the lead. It's kind of a dual lead. She is the lead in Act 1, and then it's Father Karras in Act 2. But she's just relegated into the background, and turns into kind of like a wet towel. She doesn't have enough agency. But it's so good. It's such a scary, scary book.
When did that come out?
The Exorcist came out in 1971.
Okay. The book was 1971, right?
The book's 1971. And it came out, let's see, Rosemary's Baby was 1968.
Okay.
From watching Rosemary's Baby, Blatty was like, I can do this. And then within 3 years, he turned out a published book that, did gangbusters.
Yeah, and it turned into a movie that also scared the bejesus out of people.
Yep. I even think that the book or the movie, I think, is shortly after the book.
Yeah, it was 1975?
Oh my God, 1973.
Wow.
2 years after.
Jeez.
And here's the other thing is, like, obviously during that time period, like, occult and possession was like a hot topic.
Yeah.
So listening to Amityville and reading The Exorcist, you could see how much the family and whoever they kind of concocted their ridiculous story with was influenced by The Exorcist. There's so many moments of like reference or crossover from this fictional book into like, real life. It's just like a hodgepodge of the media at the time.
Yeah.
But huge thumbs up for The Exorcist. And that's about it for reading right now.
Okay.
And watching, I just started Terminator with my kids.
The original Terminator?
Yeah, the original.
Okay.
The jump scares are really getting my youngest.
That's awesome.
But
nice night for a walk.
I want them to have I'm like not trying to recreate my youth, but in the same respect, I think that there are movies that matter and popcorn movies that matter that I want to have. I want them to think about them and see something that's not just a TikTok video.
Yeah.
So like I watched Aliens with Ivy. And she loved it. Like she was like, that's so good. Like, can we watch? She was like a little scared by Aliens.
Yeah.
But a testament to Cameron, having like just the family unit, and just, it really brought her along for the ride. She liked it so much that she turned to me and she said, I think I could do Alien 3. Let's watch it. And I was like, oh, honey, no, you don't want to. So Newt doesn't make it long.
We love David Fincher, but no, that's not his fault. It's not his fault.
Yeah. I mean, I've read all the justifications for why they killed off Newt and Hicks, but none of them, they shouldn't have. It was absolutely crazy. So anyway, I was like, we're not going to watch that, but we will watch Terminator and Terminator 2.
Yes.
Like, because I think you're responding to Cameron, not to Aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you it's not Geiger that you're interested in. It's like the funness of this popcorn director.
You're also watching like two of the best action films of all time. I'm going to put it out there. So.
Yep.
I mean, you watched Terminator 2. I watched it the other day had it on at the brewery. I just put it on in the background. I was like, man, this movie is so good and so much fun. Good. It's like, like a sequel, just knocking out of the park. And different. And it's like, it's the same but different thing, right? Like Terminator feels more like a horror movie almost.
It totally does.
Right? Like
it almost feels like a made for TV one. There's these really weird transitions to black that happen. They're jarring.
Yeah. It's so weird. And like the whole like prosthetic thing when he's cutting out his eye, I was like, this is terrifying. But then like the sequel was just a straight up action movie. And like, this is great.
Yeah. It's funny to think that Cameron had only done like Piranha 2 before Terminator, but not even the original Piranha.
Mm-mm.
But then you can understand the studios why they would have gone ahead to hire and continue to hire first-time directors or music video directors, because James Cameron wasn't always James Cameron. He was a roll of the dice. Ridley Scott wasn't only Ridley Scott. He was a roll of the dice at the time.
Yeah. Have you watched any of the animated Terminator? Was it Nexus or
no? The stuff on Netflix.
Yeah, I haven't caught any of it, but
no, I haven't. I may.
Curious. Yeah, I'm curious to throw it on and see.
I like that studio. I think they did some of the Ghost in the Shell stuff. Anyway, how about you? What are you reading? What are you watching?
Let's see. So for reading, I'm like halfway through The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson. It's good. I like him. This one's tough for me for pacing wise because the way it's structured. Have you read that one?
No, I have not. I've only read a couple of his books.
Okay.
Like I've read like Snow Crash.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I read that one. Yeah.
I think I read something else. What was his first one? Like about lobster fishing or something?
I don't know. Snow Crash is the one though, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the one that everybody's, because it was like pseudo cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Zodiac
was
like his second book, which is kind of like an environmentalism book.
Okay. We love the environment. It's good.
Anyway.
But this one, it's good. The pacing's a little strange. I'm getting into it because it's this weird... I mean, I feel like the book is about like child abuse right now because there's like kids in there who are being abused and like they run away from home. And then there's this book that is like kind of weird way, like predicting the future, creating the story for this little girl that's reading it.
Wow.
As it's moving along. So like that kind of concept is pretty cool. But then it's like she's reading ahead and seeing like some things she can't change, but then she can change. So I'm like, all right, there's some really deep, fun stuff here, but it'll cut over to like fairy tale story that the little girl's reading in the book. So is
it clear when it jumps to that?
Yeah, 100. Yeah, like the typeface change and everything like that, and and you can hear the voice. It's like, oh, this feels like she's reading this fairy tale of this book. That's basically her story that's happening in the real world.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's good. I really like it, but that's like took me a bit to like get used to that.
Can I tell you, and this is being really bleeding heart honest here, is that there are a few authors that intimidate me sometimes. Pynchon's one because I just can't get through Gravity's Rainbow, even though I love like his lighter books like Inherent Vice or whatever.
Yeah.
And Neil Stephenson is one. I obviously Snow Crash isn't that hard of a read, but I like started reading Cryptonomicon. He intimidates me. Like I feel like an idiot when I open his books. I feel like I need like a big pot of coffee.
Yep.
And I'd like to try him again. Do you feel like is this an easier read or is it a difficult read?
I think it takes you a bit to get into it, I think. And once you get into just his style of writing, it's easy and it kind of moves along. But now I'm like thinking about it out loud and talking about the themes and what's going on. I'm like, this is heavy and there's a lot more to it than I think I'm
Is there like times where like what happens to me with books like this? Like, I don't know, like Infinite Jest by like Wallace or something. I will read 3 pages and I'll go, what did I just read? Like my brain just shuts off completely.
You won't get that. There's a couple sections where I've actually gotten, it's more pacing. Like I'm only halfway through the book and I've been reading it for like a week and a half now, which is like, I'm just slow on it. I think it's just because maybe it's dense and the content, the themes are dense, but like the actual writing is fun. Like there's definitely some $1 million words in there. I'm like, what? I don't care, because that's just him, I recommend it, but I'm only halfway through, so maybe next episode.
I know objectively he's a wonderful author. It's just he's an intimidating author to me. I'm like, oh, your intellect is more than mine. So
yes, the idea that he's like putting in like another story within the story that this little girl's reading that is like a meta thing of like what's really happening to her in real life. I'm like, come on, like, I'm not messing with that.
My whole life is a challenge. I don't want a book to be a challenge now.
So maybe skip that one.
But you know what? I think you're inspiring me to like get back into Stevenson because I've only have a really cursory, exposure to him.
And then on top of that, I'm trying to read at least 2 or 3 like writing craft books.
Oh, cool.
A year. So right now I'm reading Description Setting by Ron Rosell. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's part of like this Write Great Fiction series. I've read 2 of the other ones. They've got plot and structure and like characters, voice and point of view. And they're good to like short kind of just primers on things to focus on and things to ask yourself as you're writing, just setting a description and which has been good. So it's kind of just, I'm like halfway through that. But
nice.
It's more of just like a get the brain moving and maybe a little motivated. So I watched a couple of movies actually. I haven't watched a lot of movies in a long time. So I watched The Killing of a Sacred Deer.
Oh, I like that movie.
Yeah. Slow burn, but I feel like they could have cut like a half hour and still would have had the same feeling, but slow burn. The kid, Barry Keoghan, I think is how you pronounce his name, the Irish kid.
He's Sabrina Carpenter's boyfriend.
He is creepy in that movie, and he does a really good job. And the way it's the same guy who did the Lobster, right?
Yep.
It's got that same kind of feel. The dialogue is very like truncated and very stilted and kind of weird, which I think is part of all building up the tension of it. I enjoyed it, but it's a slow burn. I watched the 3rd movie in the X trilogy there, the Maxine one.
Oh, how was that?
It was good. It was like a 80s slasher kind of crime, more actiony then I haven't watched Pearl. I just watched X, which I really enjoyed. X I thought was good. But yeah, I feel like their focus is like too much on making sure they got all the 80s vibe right versus like maybe the story, but whatever. It's supposed to be like a slasher 80s movie, which is fun.
I loved Pearl, right? And I enjoyed X. I heard the buzz around Maxine was like more mixed maybe than the other two.
That sounds about right. I haven't watched Pearl yet, but yeah, that checks out. And then I watched The Hitman, the one on Netflix with Glenn Powell. It's
I'm not familiar.
Is it Richard Linklater did that one?
Oh, really? Yeah, you're definitely right. I had no idea Linklater did a Netflix movie.
No. Maybe it's not direct to Netflix. I don't know.
It was distributed by Netflix, so it's certainly funded by them.
Yeah, so it's good.
I like him.
Yeah, it's loosely based on true story of this professor who was undercover pretending to be a hitman to get people who were like trying to hire him to kill someone and they would come in and arrest him. Honestly, it's Glenn Powell's show. It's him like really getting into like doing all these random characters, which you think you see Glenn Powell and like he was the one from Maverick, Top Gun. He played like the quote unquote Iceman replacement guy. You know, he's in the Twisters movie. Yeah. He's like, you know, a good looking guy, but in this, he's really funny and he just like kind of really has fun with the role. And I think it's just kind of his show. And it ends pretty dark, which I thought was kind of fun. So
I'll check it out. Real quick, back to Killing of a Sacred Deer and influences, I guess. It's a retelling of like a Greek tragedy, right? I remember watching it with Jill and she was saying something about like, I want to say Euripides. Anyway, I think that story is like a direct, kind of like how they do the modern retellings of Shakespeare stuff.
Yeah.
I think this is like a modernized retelling of a Greek tragedy. I just don't know the name of it.
I could totally see that in the way he wrote it, in the way that like the dialogue is presented. I could see that. And then the last one I watched, and I don't think you've seen it, so I won't get into it, but I did see Alien Romulus when it first
I've seen it.
Oh, you saw it?
Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. We can't get too into it. Maybe we'll shut this down so it's not...
Well, how about 30 seconds each, and then we'll call it a day.
30 seconds each, and then we'll talk offline here. Maybe we'll release that in side cut.
The director's cut.
Yeah, director's cut.
The assembly cut of
Writer Syndrome. Third best Alien movie.
That's not bad.
Well, all right. So here's the thing.
You like it more than Prometheus?
Yes.
Wow.
I did. I do. I have some major complaints that stand out and take me out of it to not making it like the third best Alien movie, you know?
Yeah.
There was no way it was always gonna be the third best Alien movie, I think, in my mind. But it was, how excited am I about it being the third best Alien movie? You know what I mean? Like, it's either
praise.
Yeah. So I really liked it. I thought it was shot beautifully. I thought all the actors were great. I thought
cinematography was so good. That dude hasn't done too much. I kind of Googled him and
Fede Alvarez.
No, I mean the cinematographer.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Fede's a known quantity, but like Fede and this cinematographer haven't worked before together. Anyway, he did a great job.
It was beautiful. I thought it felt lived in. It felt dirty. It felt. I like the plot idea. Like, it's a classic, like kids just trying to get off and out of the corporate thing and go to some planet of hope. I loved all that, but there was a couple things that are kind of spoilery that really stood out to me that pissed me off.
All right, what are they? Spoilers.
Spoilers from right here. I don't need the wink, wink, nod, nod to the Alien franchise and the fans too much. There's one particular line, like I'm fine with like the little thing in the background, and when they're eating, food, whatever, that's fine. I was an alien. I'm fine with a couple nods here and there. That's okay. Background Easter eggs. I love that stuff. But when there's like a central point line that is ripped right from one of the old movies and a character who shouldn't be saying this and doesn't make any sense for them to say.
So I have a comment on this, but I agree with you.
That took me out of it. And the other two things, one is we don't need to resurrect another dead actor. No,
I completely agree. Completely agree. Ian Holm should not have been.
And if you do that, you better make it sure it looks good, because
it didn't
look good. It looked jarring and fake. And it was the same thing with Tarkin from Rogue One, which
actually looked better. Yeah, even though it looked like a video game, but
that
I would have rather than just. I mean, it could have been David. It could have been just another robot.
It could be
I would have preferred a puppet of Ian Holm's head.
Yeah. Right.
Instead of, because I actually didn't know he had passed, so I was like, it was nice they got him. But that really, really irked me and took me out of it.
It took me out of it. And then my third biggest thing is we all know aliens have to be killed by getting shot out the airlock. That's apparently how you kill aliens, right?
Yeah.
And to do like the shot for shot, basically, of the end of Alien, pretty much it's just too much. Like, come up with your own way of doing this. We don't need her
another Death Star, right?
And it's the same thing. We're like, oh, we're going to cryogenic sleep. We've seen this before. Okay, and then she's in her underwear. Okay, now she's got to get in the spacesuit, and she get to do the whole thing. It's like, I just watched this movie. Like, come up with your own thing. Come up with your own thing.
Like, it's Hollywood's, and I hate saying it, but it's like the only term to describe them. Reboot equals.
Yes.
It's just like enough nostalgia for the old one, but new characters to kind of continue the same story.
Yeah.
And keep milking this, sacred cow.
And my last point, like, I'm still on the fence about the final monster, because every Alien movie you have to have a new monster, and I'm still on the fence about this thing. I think I'm going to watch it again. Like, I still generally enjoyed the movie, but like, man,
I liked it only because somehow they made a better ending to Alien Resurrection, because it's the same ending.
Yeah.
And I guess that's an actor in a suit at the end, which is crazy.
It's a basketball player. He's like 7'9" or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't mind it. He looked pretty creepy. And I liked the kind of merging with the Prometheus stuff a little bit.
I was fine with that. I was fine with like bringing the goo and like that's a little, hey, it's part of the canon. That's fine. I'm okay with that.
Yep.
I like
so
that
getting to that line, right? The line that Andy says. So I was also upset about that when he says, "Get away from her, you bitch," right? The classic Ripley line.
With a little stutter.
With a little stutter.
Yeah.
So I agree that it's pandering nostalgia. 100%.
The whole audience laughed. We all laughed.
Yep.
Which, what a great way to take you out of a transition from a horror movie to action
Even
movie.
if it was just get away from her.
Yeah.
Okay. Wink, wink, nod, nod. That's enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that we've seen it in AVP, AVPR.
Yeah.
Every other kind of iteration of this, we've kind of seen that line. It's like, come with me if you want to live. I have a bad feeling about this. Like these things we just keep hearing. But after my research, and I missed it, and this is the kind of the fault of the writing and the directing, there is an in-universe reason as to why Andy says it.
Okay.
Because Andy is called a bitch by one of the characters, and he like pauses and processes it, kind of like, I don't quite understand. So like he's like mimicking the other guy. So I'll say that it's not enough, but there's an in-universe reason for him to say it.
So there's a seed has been planted for them to use that line.
And I guess they pause on it, and he does his little mental stutter there.
Garbage. I'm calling garbage. I don't care. I'm calling garbage because, hey, I'm glad that they did like the little setup and payoff like that. Hey, that's good. That's good. But I'm calling garbage. I'm calling.
I mean, it's just for nostalgia. Even though there's a reason for it, the only actual objective reason for both of those scenes is wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're in an Alien movie.
Right. And I'm glad you found some way to sneak that in there, writer, director. But no, stop.
Yeah. So you're okay with I have a bad feeling about this?
Have a bad feeling about this from what, like Star Wars?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's like goofy. Like, we're talking about an Alien movie versus like Star Wars. I mean, am I okay with it? Maybe after like the second or third time, I'm like, okay, that's fine. After that, it's like,
because what's interesting to me is I just went back, since I enjoyed Romulus as much as I did, I went back and I like rewatched Aliens, and started playing Isolation.
Yeah, some nods to that apparently in the movie too.
And I had forgot. Yeah, I guess the save stations are in there.
Yeah,
I didn't catch them though. I just read about it. But I had forgotten that in the original Alien, that Ripley refers to Mother as a bitch.
Yes. Yeah.
So do we think Cameron is referencing Alien, the first one, when he has Ripley call the Queen that word?
Probably. But that's
so
fitting.
Good, though.
But the problem is though, but that's okay because that's fitting of the character. Like that character said it in the first movie, she's gonna say that in the second movie. Like this in this movie is just like forced nostalgia, a little nod, wink, wink, which is
even that's like in Aliens, dude. Like I was watching with my daughter. I was like, let's go.
Yeah.
And my daughter was like, why is she in a Transformer minion? This is ridiculous. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's a power loader.
Shut up, kid. Don't be so stupid, kid.
I think synopsize number 3. Number 3 in the Alien.
Yes.
Septology.
Whatever it is. Yeah. Whatever it is. But I liked a lot of things about it, which makes me, I'm going to watch it again. Those things just stood out to me, But yeah, I have a bad feeling about this. I don't know. I feel like the tone is different though. And it's like, okay, that's just the running joke now throughout Like Aliens shouldn't be a joke. This isn't a joke movie. This isn't a comedy. Like,
yeah,
it's supposed to be a horror movie. And it's like, that's not from that character. Like, I get it.
And I think there's two things, right? Like, I have a bad feeling about this for whatever reason, in the social or whatever, I guess American zeitgeist. Yeah. It makes you feel like you're in a Star Wars movie and it's fun.
Yeah.
When it's these direct wink, wink, nudge, nudges, like what Andy says, it takes you out of the experience and you're like, oh, I'm watching a movie. It like ruins that suspension of disbelief. Yeah. And I'd say that getting back to writing, it's exactly why you don't want to do it in writing. Yeah. You're ruining the flow from the reader. You're ruining that experience by winking and nudging. You're saying, I'm reading a book. And then they're going to say, oh, I should stop reading this book for a little while. Right? I have other things to do. The spell is broken.
Well, and the funny part, then I was thinking about, I was like, well, what about Prey? And I was looking, I thought about that movie, and I was like, there was a lot of kind of there's like a lot of nods to the original Predator, like the whole scene of visual. Her, like this, her figuring out like, oh, you can't see me in the mud or whatever. Like that was straight, you know what I mean? Like that's a straight scene for scene. Like, why'd I enjoy that way more than like the stuff they did in this one? And I think it's because that was not so maybe like forced. Like,
and it's visual. It's like if you see it, you see it. Right. But it's not like something like "come with me if you want to live." It's not just one of those catchphrases that has just been, copy pasted into Simpsons episodes and Saturday Night Live and whatever else. And it's fitting. It's not ruining the experience.
And it's fitting for like a character to figure out how to solve a problem.
It makes her look smart, right? And like she's troubleshooting.
This one just feels like, oh, you're just copying the same ending as Alien. Like you're just doing the same thing because
Andy wouldn't have said anything in that. Yeah, I totally agree.
No.
I think they expected cheers and instead they got jeers.
Laughs. I laughed. Yeah. We laughed. Everyone in the theater laughed. We're like, get it?
Not with it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I was like, that's stupid. This guy wouldn't say this. Like,
yep. Isn't it funny how such a small thing can be the one thing out of like
sticks in
96 minutes or whatever of like pretty like a solid movie. You can have one flub line and it's all people will talk about.
It's just stuck in my brain. So I can't get it out of my head. I'll watch it again and give it its due. But anyways, I think we're done here, right? We're done ranting and raving.
We're done. It was way more than 30 seconds.
Way more 30 seconds.
Unless you can do some like post-production magic.
We can't. Like maybe I'll chop it up as a little special side episode.
No, you wouldn't let me talk about Evil Dead 2 a few weeks ago. And here you are rambling on about Alien Romulus.
I know. You should have cut me off.
I like listening to it.
We'll get to Evil Dead 2 once I rewatch it. So that's our episode. Thanks for listening. Join us next episode. We'll discuss mistakes and expectations.
They happen.
They do. It sounds like we're going to be doing life tales. Stories of our lives. If you enjoyed the episode, share with a friend. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a review. You can also find us on Instagram at Writer Syndrome Books. And for all our episodes and contact information, visit us at writersyndrome.com.